On the off-break, I rule North Sea, biting never bites. Fast water swimming in the gun, down in the guys. Fit non seat, right, you right, fine. OMG, Mac 4, Robin C, yelling that night. Hot stove talk, Robin C, bringing the hype. EC's alive, plus trust under those in my city life. Right? Queens got the dreams united. Under rag, Trump out, Grammy stack. Night and under that chocolate flag. Smack that home out the park, rock a deafening rag. Side game time, Robin C, game time of the night.
What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to the first Mets Hot Stove of the offseason. And before we get started doing anything, I got one thing to say. The Yankees lose the World Series in embarrassing fashion, just like they did all postseason, but got lucky by the teams they faced, and they finally faced a good team that capitalized on their mistakes. Welcome to the Mets Hot Stove, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this show. There'll be a lot of these during the offseason. Chris, how are you, my friend?
Wow. I love to see not only the Yankees lose, but I also love to see that new intro in full effect for the first off-season pod right here on the Mets Hot Stove Live podcast, being streamed right from my YouTube channel, your YouTube channel. We got a plethora of topics to get into. I'm excited. We will be here with you all weekly, multiple times weekly, talking about the latest rumors, latest news, all the latest happenings this offseason. We got you covered. Don't you worry about that. And again, David Stearns is working early, right? First day of the offseason for all 30 MLB teams, and we get the New York Mets' first official major league contract signing. So I'm excited, Rob. I appreciate everyone being here. Again, hit those thumbs up buttons and subscribe to both channels. Let's get into it.
Yeah, look, I'm ready to go. Like, we were talking about this, right? We were hoping about the sweep of the Yankees. We just wanted the World Series to end so we can get into the real business, and that is the Mets offseason, because it's going to be a very big offseason for the New York Mets. Not only do the Mets have a ton of free agents, they basically have no rotation. They basically are losing a lot of bullpen. And we all know about the Juan Soto sweepstakes and everything when it comes to that in itself, and the comments that he had yesterday after losing the World Series. It wasn't even about the game. It was all about his free agency. But we're going to get all into everything. The topics are on the right. The top free agents are on the bottom. Where to find us on X for the Hot Stove Show podcast, CP's and mine. So we got everything covered for you guys. And I just wanted to say what Chris was talking about when it came to we're going to start right off the bat with the two sign-ins this offseason already, right? It was during the playoffs or during the World Series when the Mets made a move, and I'm trying to get all the names here. I'm a little flustered right now, but they made a major league signing, which, Chris, you can say who it is, and then I'll talk about the minor league signing.
Yeah, I think the minor leaguer is Davinsky, right? Former Tampa Bay Ray, and I believe the major league signing, Dylan Ons. What's the name here? I'm not sure on this guy. What was it?
I'm looking for it right now. I know you said here we go.
I dropped the short on it, so I should know.
Colby. There we go, Dylan Colby.
Yeah, there you go. We're already blanking on the first show. That's how you know it's going to be a long off season. Anyways, no, like I said, these aren't signings that are going to knock your socks off, right? This is kind of very reminiscent of what David Stearns was doing last off season, very early on, in terms of getting those depth bullpen signings out of the way. And you have a minor league contract, right? Probably going to get invited to spring training, you would think. And then you have the major league contract, which presumably carries that weight of automatically, being invited to spring training and, needing to make that opening roster, or else he gets pulled or put back in there, the pool of, veteran minimum deals, so to speak, that other teams can sign. But Again, for those of you all Mets fans that are going to start this rhetoric again, I'm not sure how or why you would start it, of this garbage bin Stearns talk or whatever. If you all didn't see what he did last offseason and you all didn't get the gist of the method to his madness in terms of getting these depth signings for the bullpen out of the way, it's a 162 game season. We saw the turnover rate of the bullpen from game 1 to game 162 of this 2024 season. These signings are necessary, right? The numbers aren't going to wow you in terms of what these guys have been doing over the last couple of years, at the MLB level. I think that the signing today, his tenure as a Philly and a Dodger in 2023, I know he didn't appear in any major league action in 2024, but he posted a 3.77 ERA across those two teams in 2023, right? The whip also really isn't pretty, but again, you get a sinker baller. I believe he throws it for over 40% in terms of his arsenal. David Stearns loves these pitchers that prioritize that sinking fastball. And we saw a multitude of Mets pitchers, both in the bullpen and the starting rotation, headlined by the New York Mets ace of 2024, Sean Manaea, utilize that sinker early and often. So again, these early offseason signings, especially the depth pieces in the bullpen, aren't going to wow anybody, but it's good to see that the Mets have options now, whether they make the team or whether they go, down to AAA and serve as that depth for, the course of the season. It doesn't really matter. But, you can believe in terms of the types of pitchers that David Stearns believes in and brings in, right? Davinsky is another guy that has an interesting arsenal. He has a splitter, I believe, to his arsenal. I think he's a primary changeup, also has a splitter. But again, right, you talk about pitch movement, velocity as well. Everything needs to be taken into account. And this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we're going to see, maybe even within the next couple of days, right? David Stearns loves to bring these types of guys in on team-friendly contracts. Obviously, these guys are veterans in their 30s, and they're not going to be making like major money here. So it's good to at least see. And you see the same thing happen last offseason, like I said, right? Remember Austin Adams? Austin Adams got brought in very early last offseason on a major league deal. He actually ended up making the team, and that was short-lived, obviously, but the same situation applies here. So I like to see at least this front office working early and often.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I can understand why people were skeptical last offseason, right? Because it wasn't no proven record when it came to Stearns with the Mets. But you know what? These two sign-ins are very similar to what end up developing into a very successful reliever in Reed Garrett. So not saying that one of these guys or both of these guys are going to end up similar to Reed Garrett, but you see what happens when certain guys get into the pitching lab, and all it takes is throwing one of your better pitches more often than not. And the pitching lab tells you which one is more effective when it comes to against batters. And on top of that, sometimes it can just be a mechanical situation. It could be, like Luis Severino. The Yankees couldn't figure out that he was tipping pitches. Severino was in the pitching lab for one day, they talked about, and they figured out that he was tipping pitches. That's how quickly the pitching lab can help a pitcher out. Now, it's up to the pitcher when he gets on the mound to execute, but when they know what they need to throw, when they see what pitch, because there's a lot of pitchers, and listen, most relievers are failed starters. That's because they don't have a plethora of pitches that are effective enough against batters. So what do? A lot of the times they cut their pitches in half and become a reliever. And that's why you see a lot of guys with maybe one or two, you see guys with two pitches, possibly three. And a lot of the times they continue to throw the worst pitch out of their arsenal. And the pitching lab will tell you, these are your two most effective pitches. Yes, you can throw your third best pitch every now and then, but if you effectively throw the right pitches and your best pitches often, you're going to be more successful if you execute it. So, and a perfect example is Reed Garrett. So again, Davinsky and Covey is not the big signings that we're waiting for, but you see David Stearns is working, right? Davinsky was, I think, like the first game or two of the World Series where they signed him. And yesterday, or was it today? It was today where they got, they signed a major league deal with another arm. So David Stearns is always working here and doing the leg work for the depth of this team early gives you a hell of a lot more time getting into your main offseason, which is the top targets in free agency, possible trades, and our guys that are free agents. So, getting rid of the depth now early on gives Stearns all the time in the world to mess around with the real important moves going forward, Chris.
Yeah, and I actually misspoke. It was Davinsky that had the changeup fastball four-seam combination, and it's Covey that's actually the sinker baller with that splitter. So I do apologize about that in terms of mixing that up. Again, with these types of moves, right? And the lack of seeing these guys over the last couple of years. I mean, Davinsky was an all-star for the Houston Astros back in like 2017, right? All the way back then. So, it's been a while, and the numbers in terms of the major league output that they've had over the last couple of seasons really isn't there. But I do think there's a method to the madness in terms of the actual movement of these guys that David Stearns brings in. And what did I talk about, right, in relation to the types of relievers that I like? The same thing applies with Ryan Stanek, which is why in my stream the other day, I mentioned, right, I went through each internal candidate or most of them that are impending free agents for the Mets. And I said whether I wanted to bring them back or not. And Ryan Stanek is a guy that I want to bring back because he has velocity, right? I like guys out of the bullpen with velocity. Stanek, right? Obviously, Edwin Diaz and a guy like Dylan Covey, the major league signing today, 95 to 96 miles per hour with his sinker. And that presumably has that two-seam movement to it as well. So again, not moves that are going to knock your socks off, right? We're still waiting for the news and the juicy signings, right? That won't happen until later this offseason with your Anthony Santanders, your Juan Sotos, who we'll talk about here in just a second, I'm sure of. Those are going to have to wait. But again, it's good to see, like you said, David Stearns working early and often. And like Ibby's saying, right? Trust in Stearns, let Stearns cook, whatever phrase you want to use. This guy deserves all the credit for what he did last offseason to make this team a championship contender, right? Obviously falling short. Everyone wasn't even sure they're going to make the playoffs. And he didn't really have the most resources to utilize in that offseason. So now, again, as we've mentioned plenty of times, just under $141 million starting payroll, right? That's a whole lot of money to work with and spread that wealth across the board to build an even better roster.
Yeah, and that's the thing that we talked about, even in going during the trade deadline in 2023, right? About all that money that was coming off in 2024, because a lot of the dead weight that we had in 2023, besides Scherzer and Verlander, but there's a couple of guys that the final years of their deal was this year that we got rid of, and that's a lot of money coming off the books. I mean, it's basically nearly $95 to $100 million coming off the books, and Steve Cohen is going to replenish that payroll to basically what it was, or at least close to it. And if you think about it, you have to, because, and David Stearns talked about it in his exit press conference. He goes, we have a lot of holes to fill. We got a rotation to fill. We got at least 2 to 4 bullpen arms that we need to add. And that's not including a couple of position situations that we probably have to go after as well. We don't have a center fielder, right? Right field is a question mark. Second base is a question mark at the moment. So there's a lot to go into that. And even if there's no big signings, which I think that would be crazy that there wouldn't be, but say if there's no big signings, the Mets are probably going to still add about between $50 and $60 million, even on, lower tier free agents or middle of the road free agents, which I don't think is going to be the case. But that's how crazy this roster and this turnover of the roster is a big difference from what it's going to be next year. We're going to have a lot of different players on this team in 2025 than we did on 2024, because again, we talked about it in the offseason or going into 2024 season. This team was set up with a lot of proven contracts where they can go either way at the trade deadline, either buyers or sellers. And obviously we ended up being buyers, but knowing that we became buyers and went on a playoff run, you kind of knew that the guys that were on 1-year deals were just going to stick it out with you, and you weren't going to obviously trade those guys because you were in a playoff race. So this offseason is very unique in the sense that they have to add roster spots. It's not like they have a roster and it's like, oh, where can we get better at certain positions? We have holes in those situations and in those spots, and there's free agents that can fill those spots. A huge difference.
Which is also the beauty of it too, because it's a complete opposite situation as opposed to a team like the Phillies that only have 4 impending free agents and they're kind of handcuffed, right? Barring any trades that they make, which I foresee in their future this offseason, because I don't think that they can roll with that same roster to try to get over the hump, right? But yeah, it's a beautiful thing that creates a lot of flexibility in terms of the decision making that David Stearns is going to have to utilize this offseason, and that he did last offseason, but now with the more plentiful resources. And the one thing that I took from his press conference, right, and I made a video about that, is like, the word aggressive in certain areas that, he said that their Mets are going to prioritize and pick and choose those battles in terms of where to be aggressive. They have financial flexibility, right, straight from the mouth of the president of baseball operations of this organization. That is a beautiful thing to hear, and that's something that could not have been said last offseason when he was making his way into the Mets organization. Justin Verlander also, right, 90 innings pitched, so he doesn't hit that 140 inning mark. And the Mets are off the hook for his 2025 salary because that was that weird vesting option that they had at the end of that contract. And listen, I'm actually kind of curious about the way the approach is, what approach is going to be taken, because I see here Kendrick with a pretty good statement saying, I think David, being David Stearns, presumably, is going to have a lot of 1-year deals on the table. That's something he did last offseason, but the Mets are still kind of in between a young roster, right, in terms of the guys that are coming up, Rob. So with these expectations now on the board, the Mets coming into this past 2024 season had no expectations, and that it was okay to give out all these 1-year deals, right? But we also talked about prioritizing that youthful talent, and we thought the Mets were going to have more opportunities to prioritize and give those young guys a shot, and that simply wasn't the case. So now with guys like Luis Angel Acuna, right? Ronnie Mauricio coming back. You got guys coming up through the system like Jet Williams and Drew Gilbert, right? That are going to be ready sooner rather than later, whether it's 2025 or 2026. And then also on the pitching side, you got your Tidwells, your Brandon Sproats, right? Christian Scott, who obviously we saw for half the season. There's a lot of young guys still in the fold. So it's like David Stearns also has to figure that out in terms of blending and managing those championship, aspirations now, while also retaining some of the youth. But also, right, you can't be rolling with all youth. You have to have some of that veteran presence, and you're going to have to give out some long-term contracts. So it's all about blending and picking and choosing your battles this offseason. So I'm kind of curious in terms of like what you think in terms of what Kendrick is saying. Do you see another offseason where you see a lot of 1-year deals, maybe a long-term contract sprinkled in because of the youth? Or do you think that the Mets are in a position where they're like, screw the youth, right? We might find some trade partners for some of these young guys, because right now with the flexibility in terms of the money that we can spend and where we ended up this last season, 2 games shy of the World Series, we simply can't rely on a team full of young guys that don't really have that much MLB experience yet. I'm kind of curious.
Yeah. So what you said it exactly. There's expectations going into next year now, right? There was none in 2024. So David Stearns could have done whatever he wanted, right? If he would have went big time, and if they would have signed Yamamoto and signed a couple of the big guys, everybody would have been excited, but still understand that, 2024 still might not have been our year and be an expectation type of year. This year was expected, regardless of what happened in 2024. 2025 was supposed to be the year where he started to take off. So the 1-year deals, I think you'll see that with the bench guys, like maybe like a Winker, maybe somebody else. And the utilization of possibly the younger kids. Obviously, Alvarez is established as their catcher, Vientos as the third baseman, possibly Acuna, possibly at second base. Those are guys that are cheap. So they're not going to cost you a ton of money in payroll. So I don't see position players as starters being on one-year deals like the Harrison Bade's of the world. I don't see that at all. I don't see you signing a one-year deal for Joey Wendell. Guys like that, I don't think that's going to be the case. I could see Jesse Wicker coming on a one-year deal because you probably can get him for a decent price considering he wants to be back. Same thing with Sean Manaea, right? I don't think it's going to be a long-term deal. I think Sean Manaea wants to come back, and I think he's going to take a somewhat team-friendly deal, but a nice deal, something that both sides can be happy with.
Do you really think so? Because I think Sean Manaea is going to be asking for 3 years at the minimum, maybe even up to 4 years. I truly believe that.
I'd give him 3 years. I give him I would say a vesting option for the 4th year, where if he hits his innings and if he whatever numbers you want to put in that vesting option as a 4th year to protect the Mets, and also Sean Manaea, if he does his job, he can actually, get that 4th year. I think Sean Manaea wants to be here. I don't think the Mets are going to low blow him, to be quite honest with you. But it also depends, right? If the Mets are going heavy after, say, Sasaki, if he's posted, or Corbin Burns, maybe Sean Manaea is not an option. So that's something you have to look at as well. And look, we're going to need rotation because David says he wants a 6-man rotation. So you're going to have arms that you at least trust for, throughout your rotation.
And no, that 6-man rotation is not going to be comprised, at least I hope it's not, of Tyler McGill. Let's get him out of our minds, Mets fans, please. We need somebody other than him. He's not a 6-man.
Yeah, so I don't think there's going to be a lot of one-year deals. As I said, I do think you're going to see one-year deals probably with the bullpen.
For sure.
The reason why I say that is because, have we watched this postseason? Big time names, big time contract guys that are expected to get good big deals in the bullpen, didn't fare very well in the postseason. And a lot of these, again, it's a crapshoot when it comes to the bullpen guys. And I'm not giving top dollar to anybody who is not getting signed to be your closer. And obviously, Edwin Diaz is your $20 million man and your closer. Not saying that I wouldn't go after Tanner Scott. I would. But that might be the highest I go into giving anybody a multi-year deal that is not Tanner Scott. Everybody else, I give 1-year deals to. Stanek, you want a 1-year deal? You want to come back to the Mets? I'll give you a 1-year deal. Right? I know Phil Maton is probably not an option because they're gonna decline that team option. But if Phil Maton wants to come back on a 1-year, $2 million deal, you'll take him. Right? Because you got to fill depth spots in the bullpen. Even if Maton is going to be a high leverage guy, you need a guy that plays the Adam Ottavino role, and Phil Maton can do that. So, and you got to go through 162 game season, so you're not going to always use your high leverage guys in every game. So you're going to need those guys like the Phil Matons of the world to pitch, blowout games, to pitch, games that might go deep into extra innings, or if a starter goes, gets kicked out in the second inning, Phil Maton can throw you 2-3 innings, something like that. So those are, I think the 1-year deals are going to happen like that. But the only guy I would go after that I would give multi-year deal to is Tanner Scott. That's if he doesn't want to be the closer, because he won't be the closer here. I mean, he will close, considering, he is basically a closer, but he will close games with the Mets when Diaz not available. But you might have to overpay to get Tanner Scott. And I don't know if David Stearns is willing to use that part of the payroll for the bullpen because, right, did bullpen win games in this postseason really? Like, did we, not really, right? Even the Dodgers, who won the World Series, bullpen game wasn't very good, right? Against the Mets, against the Padres, it was good. But against the Mets, against the Yankees, it wasn't. So, and I think you got to be careful with giving multi-year deals because the guys that you give big deals to, even Tanner Scott, right? Tanner Scott might be the best arm available, but we don't know if he's going to have those years going forward because it's such a crapshoot. And what about Estevez? I know Lindor hit the grand slam against him, but Carlos Estevez is another guy who's probably going to be looking for a decently big deal, who has a great arm that I was looking for the Mets to try to go get and the Phillies got him. So I think it's going to be the bullpen and bench pieces that you can see a lot of 1-year deals.
I would definitely take Stanek back on a 1-year deal. Given his age, I don't think he's going to be asking for anything more than that. And I think that the AAV would be somewhere around 2, 2.5, maybe 3 tops. That's something that I would absolutely do. I'm going to be honest with you. I think that if you want one of those top guys, like you said, in terms of the relief market, you're going to have to give a 2 or 3 year deal to, maybe a 3-year deal with a club or a player option after that, something like that, right? Preferably the club option, for obvious reasons. But I will say, in addition to Tanner Scott, there's another lefty that I would give a multi-year deal to, and just for the, because he's good first and foremost, but also just to get him into, Queens and away from a division rival. This guy's been great against the New York Mets over the, for the past couple of seasons. AJ Minter is out there for the taking. I would love to have AJ Minter, and the Mets need a lefty. And I said on my stream as well that, if all else fails and you don't land a guy like AJ Minter, you don't, land a guy like Tanner Scott, you still need that lefty, because I think that's what the Mets bullpen was missing after the Brooks Raley injury. I would even bring back Brooks Raley, not going to lie. I think that coming off of an injury, right, he's probably in the market for a 1-year deal. He's getting up there in age as well, but let's not forget the type of season that he had in 2023 for the New York Mets, posting a 2.80 ERA. And also before he got injured in the beginning of 2024, he had about 8 games under his belt. He was on a pretty good trajectory. So if all else fails, I'm not saying to prioritize him, but if all else fails, if David Stearns is hesitant to give these, top relievers top dollar for multi-years, then Brooks Raley is a guy that I could see being brought back for another season at the very minimum. So, that's a good point. But I will say, in addition to Tanner Scott, I know everyone's going to be talking about Tanner Scott. Don't forget about AJ Minter. And there's another lefty on this market in the starting pitching category that I don't know if the Braves are going to re-sign, because if they wanted him back, and they had that plan, they would have re-signed him. He's another lefty, but maybe we'll talk about that here in just a second. I think the Mets have a realistic shot at landing someone by the name of Max Fried.
Yeah. When it comes to Scott and Minter, I think we're gonna get one of them. And I think Minter's probably gonna be a little bit more cheaper than Tanner Scott, only because Minter has had injury plagued years. Over the last couple, he did pitch well when he did pitch, but he was injured. I think you can get him a little bit more on a discount. So listen, you need a lefty. I'm sick and tired of going with right-handers that are possibly good against lefties. I know the numbers say, but you've seen it in this post. You've seen it in the World Series, how even though bad lefties were getting big hitters that were left-handed out in the playoffs. And look, the Mets got extremely lucky when it came to against Philadelphia, as the Philadelphia Phillies couldn't hit at all, couldn't hit anybody. And, having those big lefties, and especially in the NL East where you got a ton of power hitting lefties that you have to deal with. I'd like to have 2 lefties, but I will settle with 1 lefty, in a good lefty in the bullpen, but I want 2. I would like to have 2. Like if you want to throw in Danny Young or Alex Young along with a Tanner Scott or a Minter, I'm good with that. Right. I think it's so important to have lefties, especially when you're in the NL East facing high powered left-handed batters constantly. And I think it would be a smart move to at least have 1. And Minter and Tanner Scott, I think, is one of the guys that Stearns is going to get. And then 1-year deals after that, I think, because I don't think he's going to sign 2 big relievers, because, that allocates, between $10 to $20 million, probably around $10 to $50 million, for each of those guys, because they are that good. They're probably going to get around that. If you really think about it, because they both can be close. We know Tanner Scott's a closer. Minter could be one too. So that's something that I think David Stearns has got to look at a lot.
And that's something also where you just said with the multiple lefties in the bullpen, right? Minter and Tanner Scott, they throw gas. They throw upper to mid 90s, and Danny Young really doesn't. And he's more of a junk baller. So it's also having 2 opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of the types of lefties that you have in your bullpen also could play as an advantage for the New York Mets. So I just wanted to add on to that point. But yeah, listen, 30 minutes into the stream, This is getting me fired up. I appreciate everyone being here. Thanks to everybody in the chat, whether you're in my chat, whether you're in Rob's chat. Continue to answer the live chat polls. I think eventually we're going to have to talk about Pete Alonso. He's my live chat poll candidate today on my channel. But again, make sure you're subscribing to both channels as well. If you are new to either of our channels, we got you covered all off season long. I'm excited, man. This is awesome. Mets off-season talk is back. Let's get it.
And look, this is the first team of the Mets hot stove. It's extremely early, right? This is a broad spectrum of topics because there's nothing to really talk about in the needs of rumor mill or anything like that. Besides Juan Soto that everybody knows the Mets are going to be on, right? There's not much other stuff that we can really talk about that, has any, I guess, stamp of approval of from a reporter or something like that. It's just our opinions at this point, but it starts to open up the conversation. And that's what we're trying to do in day one of Mets Hot Stove to start the offseason, is to open up the conversation about, Tanner Scott, Minter, guys that people might have not been talking about or even looking at. Now they're going to be talking about it. And that brings up, more information and more shows if things starting to heat up a little bit and we're like, hey, we talked about this, 10 days ago, 10 shows ago, whatever. That's the important part. So the free agent targets for the Mets, right? I think that's another broad spectrum, right? Obviously, you got the top 20 free agents. Again, depending on the list that you looked at, I picked up a list. It was from the MLB site. I threw in Severino Minaya, even though they weren't in the top 20 because they're our guys. But there's guys like Blake Snell, who is probably going to opt out. We know Sean Manaea is going to opt out, right? Those are two pitchers, two lefties that are probably going to opt out of their contracts. And you do wonder, would the Mets like to go after Blake Snell other than Manaea, even though it might cost them more? But Snell is probably, the better pitcher, even though he's a 5-inning pitcher. That's something to worry about as well. But I want to start with the outfield because, we don't have a center fielder. Marte's on his last leg in right field. So technically you got Nimmo in the outfield, right? I think we can all agree that the outfield in center field and right field is kind of an open spot, right? I think we can agree with that.
Tyrone Taylor, but yeah, he's more of a bench bat. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not going to bring the prospects yet because I don't think you can fully count on guys like Drew Gilbert yet, even though he's killing it in the Arizona Fall League. I don't think David Stearns is going to say, all right, Drew Gilbert, you're our center fielder this year. Go and see how you do. I don't think David Stearns can risk doing that right now, especially when you got guys like Vientos, Alvarez, and Acuna, guys that probably are going to end up, fully embedded in this roster. Obviously, Vientos and Alvarez, but that's something to look at. So when it comes to the outfield and these guys that are on the top free agent list right now, you got Soto, right? You got Santander, you got Bellinger, you got Hernandez. Those are the guys that are obviously the top outfielder guys. I'm going to leave Juan Soto to the side for a second because that's the obvious one. But if you had to choose another guy as a plan B, if Juan Soto isn't the guy the Mets get, right? Because I do believe they're going to get one of these guys for right field. If it's not Juan Soto, it's going to be one of these other guys. I'd be shocked if it's not. Where would you go? Depending on, obviously you have in your own mind what the Mets are going to do elsewhere in the pitching department, in center field, and places like that, in the bullpen. If you don't get Juan Soto, what is a guy that you would want as a plan B for the New York Mets if you're David Stearns?
I think the easy answer here is Anthony Santander. I think that's the easy answer. Absolute stud, lefty bat, power bat, great. I mean, I don't think the Orioles are going to re-sign him, to be honest. I don't know what the Orioles are going to do, first and foremost. I know they have a new ownership group, but I don't think Burns goes back there, and I don't think Santander goes back there. I think that they're going to take the chances with their young guys. And it's kind of a risky move for them to do, but I think that's the sort of route they're going to take. But I could be wrong. You know what? I mean, I'm curious to see Teoscar Hernandez he obviously went there to LA to win. That was the key emphasis to what he said. And he did that, right? He fulfilled what he wanted to do in terms of getting a World Series. Obviously only signed to a 1-year deal. we both wanted this guy last offseason,
Yep.
right? We both wanted him. I was willing to dish out, a 3-year contract for Teoscar Hernandez if that's what it took. If there's a way and if there's a world where, he wants to take on a bigger challenge in terms of helping another team win a world championship, not being the Dodgers, come on over to New York, man. Please come on over to New York because that guy is an absolute stud. Obviously, primarily, the Mets are going to need not only an outfielder, but also he can slot in very easily as a DH type candidate too, depending on what the defensive alignments, Mendoza wants to roll with on any given night. Teoscar Hernandez is a guy that we just saw what he did in these playoffs. We saw what he did all season, right? I mean, last night he had a huge double late in the game for the Dodgers. I mean, this guy has been in a lot of key situations in his career. And, I see that M Easy in the chat here saying that a Teoscar Hernandez signing would be kind of a little scary. I don't know if I agree. Maybe if you're talking about potentially giving him a longer term contract, but you know what? I think he's worth the risk. So I think that in that order, it's Soto, Santander, and Teoscar Hernandez. And you know what? I might even give Teoscar Hernandez that same level playing field as Anthony Santander in terms of who is the 1B option for the New York Mets if all else fails with Juan Soto. So I think it's really those three guys, though, in terms of the free agent market, right? I mean, those are the big fishes in the pond in terms of your outfield candidates. So, yeah, I mean, I saw that big smile on your face when I started saying Teoscar Hernandez's name. I know you like him as well. So,
yeah, that's a guy that's obviously going to cost less than Santander, obviously Juan Soto, and who knows with Bellinger. I think Hernandez will probably get a little bit more than Bellinger. But what Easy was saying about Teoscar Hernandez scares me. You could say that about anybody. There's a lot of people that says Juan Soto scares me for giving him $600 million if that's the case, right? That scares me too, right? Just because he's young doesn't mean that it's going to be a successful contract. You can say that with Pete Alonso, right? People are talking about, oh, you got to re-sign Pete Alonso because of the postseason he had, but are you willing to give him 7 years, $200 million, what he's probably asking for, and hope for the best? I think any move that has long years and a good amount of money should scare you, but you can't be scared anymore. We got to stop that Mets scared fandom shit, because it annoys the hell out of me, because you're never going to win if you're going to continue to be scared off by players because this might happen and that might happen. Anything can happen to any player. Anybody. Doesn't matter if 100% of Met fans say Juan Soto's the guy to get. That doesn't mean it's going to be the best signing. It's going to just work out for us. We just don't know that. And what also annoys me is that we keep on going back to the fact that, the Mets haven't been really successful with a lot of their signings in their history when it comes to big signings. They usually fell off either after 1 or 2 years or just rapidly declined, right? I think we got that Jason Bay syndrome a little bit when it comes to Met fans, and you can't worry about that. Here's what I want. I want winners, right? I talked about this, right? We talked about this in the middle of the year where we don't believe this core has a winning mentality or have a winning, DNA, right? I want winners. Teoscar Hernandez is a winner. Teoscar Hernandez is a clutch performer. Give me guys that have done it before over guys that I have no idea what they're going to do, right? Teoscar Hernandez, I watched him this whole playoffs, right? He didn't do nothing against the Mets until game 6, right? But he destroyed the Padres. He destroyed the Yankees, right? Performed well in the postseason. I want guys who's been there, done that before. I'm not talking about guys that are 36 years old that has been there before. I'm talking about guys in their prime that I've seen done it very recently. That's the guys I want, right? Because why did the Mets not get over the hump? Because they had a lot of guys that haven't been there before, that haven't done what I've seen other guys do. And not saying that the Mets, you can't do that with guys who haven't been there before. It's possible. But look at the prior World Series champions, right? What did they all have? They had guys that have been there before. They have guys that have titles. They have guys that have been tremendously either successful or have a ton of experience in the postseason. Again, that is not, the only way to win a championship, right? I understand that. But I'd rather have that on my team where I'm confident that I've seen this guy do it before. Why can't he do it again? Right? I want those guys. I don't want question marks. I'm sick and tired of question marks because could we be honest, guys? The Mets made it to the game 6 of the NLCS. But every time we talked about, Chris, we were on the pregame for how many postseason games and post games, how many, or especially pre-games, how many times that we didn't know what we were going to get from certain guys on a constant basis, right? It was a wait and see approach, right? Even Sean Manaea, even Luis Severino, even Jose Quintana, right? Anybody you want to talk about, even position players. We didn't know what we were going to get from day to day or start to start. Why? Because these are guys that haven't really done much. And if they'd done it before, it was years ago, where 6-7 years ago, they were completely either different pitcher or, doesn't have the same repertoire as they did, 5 years ago. So I don't want to keep on questioning, we started to talk about Sean Manaea's innings deep into the playoffs. Luis Severino, we started to talk about that. I don't want to talk about that anymore. I want to go Yamamoto Flaherty game 1, even though Flaherty, was the guy that wasn't really, he had one good start, one bad start in series. But, a guy like Yamamoto who pitched extremely well in the postseason, right? There wasn't a question. They knew you were going to get good starts out of them, right? I want that from guys. Not saying that it's 100%, foolproof, but I want proving guys. I think it's important to have that. And you can trickle into young guys, right? We already seen it. Vientos became a star in the postseason, right? But that doesn't mean because Vientos does that it's going to be Gilbert next year or Acuna or Alvarez, right? I want proven guys on this team in the pitching department, in the lineup, along with the young guys that you can currently have on your team, Chris. At least that's me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you 100%. It'd be nice not to have to worry about those guys, right, reaching their innings limits, like you said. Now that Sean Manaea has done it, you've seen there's also, right, you can say, okay, we've only seen him do it for 1 year, so how confident are we going to, be in him to do it in year 2? So again, you can keep on finding these little, holes in these arguments of, what if, what could be, et cetera. And I think that if you are doing that, right, it's just a never-ending cycle, and you can find arguments in terms of why you wouldn't pay Juan Soto top dollar because he doesn't play great defense, even though he was a Gold Glove finalist. Like, you can find holes with any single player, right, and poke at those arguments. So I get it, but at a certain point, right, the Mets have to field the roster and they have to make these decisions. And I want those guys that have been there, like you said, have done it, and just have pop to their bats, right, or have electricity to their pitches. And I think that these guys, most of these guys on your top free agents list, definitely have that. In terms of the outfield talk as well, I know that this would be kind of a letdown or disappointing, right? But I mean, I know a lot of people are going to scoff at this when I say it, but I wouldn't even necessarily mind. I kind of wanted him at the deadline before the Mets got Jesse Winker, is Michael Conforto. I mean, he just put up a 20 home run season for the San Francisco Giants. Do I think that he's a starter for 162? No. Again, that's your last resort, but we're talking about, if your first 4 or 5 top options are not available, which they should if you have this, if you're starting this type of payroll. But again, we have to cover all bases on this stream, right? Michael Conforto in that reunion, he's been there, he's done that, right? For the Mets in 2015, that guy, he kind of fits the bill, even though his play has definitely declined, right? A name that I talked about when I did a live stream with my buddy Darren. I did a post-game stream with Darren after the Athletics series, I believe at home against the Athletics, and where Brent Rooker completely destroyed, the New York Mets, and he was just hitting the cover off the baseball. My guy Darren and myself were talking about a potential trade with how, uncertain the Oakland Athletics organization is, right? With their roster, with their stadium, and the way that, where they're headed as an organization, as a franchise. Brent Rooker is a guy that has always piqued my interest, and he's able to get you 30 plus home runs, especially if a guy like Pete Alonso walks and you need to match that, home run power, that production. I think that's striking a trade. And we all know that in the history of these two franchises, right, going back, way back, and even recently, the Mets and the Athletics have made deals, with each other in the past. And pretty heavily too, right? It's been on a multitude of occasions. So I would keep an eye out, for that name. I see a lot of people in the chat talking about Brent Rooker. Go back, watch my Mets News in the Minute shorts. I posted a clip from that live stream. I said it back, we talked about that back in August when that series happened. So this was 2 months ago that we said it, but I want to kind of rehash it because I see a lot of other, content creators are talking about Brent Rooker. A lot of other Mets fans are talking about him. So that's a trade option, a trade route that you can go ahead and take. And you know what? In dealing with the Athletics organization, I feel like you can get him for a cheaper value than if you were to do a deal with another team, like maybe the Blue Jays or whoever have you. So again, a lot of different options and a lot of different routes the Mets can take. But I think the top three names that we kind of gave you all here in terms of the free agent category, right? I think it'd go obviously Soto, a split level playing field between Santander and Teoscar Hernandez. I think you can throw Cody Bellinger's name in there, even though he didn't have as great of a season as he did in 2023. The level of production kind of fell off, only 18 home runs. He batted .266. Depends on what his asking price is going to be, right? Again, I'm not giving Cody Bellinger anywhere near a 6-year deal. I just don't think that he had a good enough 2024 following that electric 2023 season. But again, a guy that I would give a 2-year deal or maybe a 2-year deal with the team option for the third year. I think that is the proper value for Mr. Cody Bellinger. So again, there's a lot of different routes the Mets can take via free agency or trade. We'll continue to talk about them as we hear more rumors, as we hear more news, who might be available, who might not be available, etc. But going into this season, I think that there's a world where Starling Marte, isn't a New York Met in 2025. I thought the same thing could have been said this past offseason, but obviously the Mets, retained him. And I think that Starling Marte is a very serviceable vet, right? I think that obviously he has the injury concerns, but when he's on the field, he is producing, a lot of the time for the New York Mets. But he is kind of a defensive liability at this point of his career, just based off of the mileage that he has on his legs and, sort of the injuries that he sustained to his legs. So if he's kind of limited in that role as a right fielder defensively, what is the other option, right? You're not going to DH Starling Marte if you have championship level aspirations. He's simply not going to produce you, DH level production, DH type production. So a lot of question marks. We can trickle it down to Jeff McNeil with a plethora of middle infielders. If you want to talk about the infield for a second in terms of who's going to be that tandem with Lindor up the middle, you got Acuna, right, who kind of came onto the scene very strong to fill in for Francisco Lindor. It was a very short sample size, but I was very encouraged to see the production that he had. Obviously, Jeff McNeil being the staple the last couple of years up the middle with Lindor. He has a potential to be an outfielder, not a very good one, but he can be an outfielder. You got a guy like Ronnie Mauricio coming back, Jose Iglesias, who you can also probably retain for a 1-year deal as well. He was very serviceable for the New York Mets. There's a lot of different routes the Mets can take, and they're going to have to add, right? Addition by subtraction. I think that there's going to be, a couple of trades up the sleeve of David Stearns this offseason. And it's going to be an interesting time to see, what those package deals might look like. Do they involve the veterans? Do they involve the prospects, the young guys? It's all up in the air, really. It really is all up in the air. There's so many routes that David Stearns and the Mets can take.
Yeah, and when it comes to guys like Jeff McNeil and Starling Marte, I don't like Starling Marte on the bench. I think he's a guy that's a creature of habit, and he needs to play every day to be consistent with the bat, and he's a defensive liability, like you said. So him coming off the bench, as a defensive replacement late in the game, would it make sense? So he's not a good bench piece. Is he a guy off the bench that could do some damage? Yeah, but he isn't a guy that can be sitting down cold and says, all right, here, get a big hit for us in the 8th inning, right? I don't think he's that type of guy. Jeff McNeil, I could see him being a guy, but I don't know if you can keep a guy on a bench that's making around $15 million a year. I don't think David Stearns wants to do that.
Well,
so,
you could. It would just hurt his ego.
yeah, exactly. Like I don't know if they want to do that. And I still think there's still a lot of tension between McNeil and a lot of the guys on that team, including Lindor. Like I know it's been quieted down, but it's not too long ago that the raccoon happened. You know, it's a lot of things that went around, and I don't know, especially with Lindor establishing himself as the leader of this team now. I don't think they're gonna play games with that, and I think early on is what we're gonna be watching more of when it comes to Stearns, because you can't make moves that involve right field if Marte is still on this team. I don't think you can do that. So I wouldn't be shocked if early on in this offseason, maybe right after the GM meetings or during the GM meetings, that you're going to hear trade rumors in regards to Jeff McNeil and Starling Marte, maybe a package deal, not this together, but say like Marte and a couple of prospects for like a guy like Brent Rooker, right? Marte goes back to where it all started, where we really successful in Oakland, and maybe goes there. And you bring up a couple of prospects there and you get Brent Rooker, stuff like that. Jeff McNeil, you might get, a quality bullpen arm for him, where somebody might be looking for a second baseman or a guy that can play many positions, and you might have to eat a little bit of that money. But I think the Mets will, knowing that you can get better players to replace them overall. So, it really depends. But I do think to look very closely early on in this offseason, GM meetings, right after the GM meetings leading up to, around the Christmas time when the winter meetings start, you might see early on that the Mets make a trade to trade McNeil or trade Marte and maybe a few prospects to get somebody in, or at least trade in Marte for whatever they can probably get. And same thing with McNeil in regards to that, because I think it makes the most sense, because I don't think you can have those guys on the roster and make deals like, all right, we signed Juan Soto, so now Marte's on a team. What do? You're gonna leave teams knowing that you have to get rid of Marte, and they're gonna have you over a barrel and probably, say, well, we're not giving you nothing for him, and you might lose value on certain guys, because just because we don't think they have value doesn't mean another team might not think they have value. Because a lot of teams, I'm telling you, still think that McNeil has something in him. And, and same thing with Marte. They might, somebody that's only on a 1-year deal at this point, teams love that because it's off the books the following year, Chris. So,
but it's the right team that's going to take that on. It's going to be a playoff contending team. It's not going to be a team, right, that's not anywhere close to the playoffs, right? Because then at that point, and even still with the contending team, I'm sure the Mets are going to have no problems paying most of that salary, right? Just like Steve Cohen has done with the dead cap money over the years. I mean, Steve Cohen was paying in excess of $85 million for players that were not on this team in 2024. Can we just think about that? But again, you're going to have to package some prospects, to maybe even entertain some of these teams, and talking about a guy like Marte with his age as a factor and what he makes, et cetera. And a guy like Jeff McNeil, who, let's face it, has not looked great the last couple of seasons, right? I mean, he hasn't. So, it has to be the right team. And I think that the only teams that would be even remotely interested without maybe any prospects attached would have to be playoff contenders.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, it's going to be difficult, but I think to watch that early in the offseason, because I think one of them, either Marte or McNeil, are going to be off this team rather quickly, to be quite honest, because I don't think Stearns is going to start making moves for spots that are currently occupied by those guys. I think it just brings unnecessary tension that I don't think Stearns needs to deal with or wants to deal with. And that's something I think you could be looking out quite early. So top trade targets, right? You talked about Brent Rooker, right? There's been a lot of talk about Vlad Guerrero Jr., right? And that could involve the Mets, considering the fact that if they don't want to give Alonso anywhere near what he's asking for, and he might get it elsewhere, well, what do you think the Mets do with that, right? I'm going to make you talk about Vlad Guerrero a little bit. I'm going to be right back. But Chris, if you can hold it down for like 2 or 3 minutes, I'll be right back. Sorry
Yeah,
about that.
that sounds good. Listen, I think this whole Vlad Guerrero Jr. idea is a pipe dream. I really do. So I hate to burst anybody's bubble, but if you guys are expecting the Mets to be aggressive, in the trade market, with the Blue Jays for the services of Vlad Guerrero, good luck. But it's an interesting conversation to have, especially when talking about the comparisons of Pete Alonso, because again, Vlad Guerrero in 2025 is entering his last year of arbitration. The estimation for him in terms of what he's potentially going to make in this year's per Spotrac is about $28.5 million for just that 1 year before he becomes an unrestricted free agent. And you better believe he's not going to sign any extension until Pete Alonso signs his, because if Pete Alonso is asking for $29 million, maybe even 30, can you imagine what Vlad Guerrero is going to ask in return after that? I mean, let's be real here, especially with the bounce back season that, Vlad Guerrero had this past season in 2024. I mean, it was absolutely unreal. So I would kind of pump the brakes on that discussion, or at least being too serious about that discussion. But, I'm not really sure. I'm going to reintroduce this topic. If anybody in the chat right now, and we appreciate you all being here again, on behalf of both myself and Rob for the first Mets Talk Live, Mets Hot Stove Live of the season, of the offseason. We appreciate you all being here. Smash those thumbs up buttons for us. When was the last time we've seen like a sign and trade type of deal with guys in the MLB? I mean, we see it all the time in the NBA, but have we ever seen that in the MLB? I guess that's my homework for you all. And I have to do a little bit of homework myself in terms of if that's ever happened and when the last time would happen. Because can you imagine a sign-in trade with Pete Alonso and Vlad Guerrero Jr.? That'd be kind of crazy. I'm not sure why the Blue Jays would do it, but that would be kind of funny if that ended up, being the case. Again, pipe dream. I would just pump the brakes on a lot of this Vlad Guerrero Jr. talk. Inevitably, with some of the contracts that they've already given out, I foresee the Blue Jays keeping Vlad Guerrero. But again, you just never know what they're thinking in terms of maybe a rebuild. They've been a team that's had expectations, for the past couple of years, and they've come up well short of those expectations. So we'll see what happens with that. But the broader kind of conversation, and I'll let Rob talk about his thoughts on Vlad Guerrero and how feasible he thinks that is after he comes back in here. And there you go. Because I was just going to segue from Vlad Guerrero into Christian Walker. But, I was basically telling the chat, I was just like, I think Vlad Guerrero is a pipe dream. And I was just basically saying that I think the Blue Jays are never really going to re-sign him. But have you ever seen a sign-in trade in the MLB, Rob? Have you ever seen that? I don't think I have.
Lindor.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm talking about where you resign the contract first and then you trade the player, right? Because in the NBA, what I've seen in the past is obviously you sign, the original team gives the contract, I believe, to the player, and then they trade him. I don't know. I mean, it's really interesting because obviously Pete Alonso is going to need the contract before Vlad Guerrero. And the Mets don't have any rights to trade Pete Alonso right now. So it wouldn't really be a true sign and trade unless you give him the contract up front, because you don't have any rights to Pete Alonso at this point unless you extend him and then trade him. So I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And Mike Lowry, Braves, and Matt Olson trade. That was one of that something like that. But it's hard to do that because you have one of the most powerful unions in America in the players union that doesn't like to allow that, because it kind of seems like the player is leaving a little money off the table, and the union doesn't like that when they do that. Even though Matt Olson did it and it happens rarely, the union doesn't like that. So it's rare that the players are going to do that. But is it possible that the Mets could go after Vlad Guerrero Jr. if all options fail? Sure. Right. Yeah. I know you said, I think I heard you say that Guerrero arbitration is going to be around $28.5 million or something.
28.5 is what Spotrac is predicting. Yep.
So yeah, that's a lot of money. And that's something that Alonso's looking for. He's looking around that type of money. If you really think about the 7 for 200, that's right up in that alley. And, it really depends on what you're looking for, right? I don't think lately it seems like first baseman has been an extremely important position all of a sudden over the last 4 to 5 years. I mean, look what the Braves did with Olsen. Look what, Freddie Freeman with the Dodgers and the Braves, right? Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I know a lot of people talk about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And I always had this comment and his opinions to say about Pete Alonso, how much he's padded his stats in in months that didn't matter where the Mets weren't in contention. Well, you can say the same thing about Vlad Guerrero Jr. With the Toronto Blue Jays, who had a ton of expectations, and they've not either failed in the playoffs quickly or didn't make the playoffs at all. And Vlad Guerrero Jr. is a part of that. And he's played in a lot of months where the Toronto Blue Jays were out of it. And he's padded his stats as well. Yes, he's younger. Yes, you love the stats that you see him. But you also have to understand, he has been part of that culture, of that core that has failed, where everybody had a lot of expectations, for the Toronto Blue Jays. So you also got to take that into consideration. I can't throw Pete Alonso under the bus with that and not do Vladimir Guerrero Jr. as well. Even though I think Vlad's better than Pete Alonso and obviously younger, you got to be careful just by looking at that and saying, well, Guerrero has great numbers, but look at the years that Toronto has when they were basically out of it since like June. Like when there's no pressure on you, guess what? It's easy to play. Right? Vlad Guerrero Jr., the limited amount of postseason games he hasn't been good. So that's something you also have to take into account as well. And that's why when Chris brought up Christian Walker, he might be the best option for the Mets, right? It'd be a lower tier deal, around 3-year deal because he's older, but he can provide the power that you would be losing from Pete Alonso, but you'll have a better defensive player. I know Pete Alonso has been really good with the glove, but his throws are a problem, and Christian Walker is better overall. But you can do that to save money elsewhere if you are going to go after Juan Soto. Well, I don't think anybody's going to complain if you get Juan Soto, Corbin Burns, and Christian Walker. That's a pretty damn good offseason, right? That's a possibility because you are saving a ton of money and years from Alonso to Walker. I think anywhere between 3 to 4 years more for Pete Alonso, and that's money saved that you can use elsewhere to better your team. And that's something you also have to look at.
For those of you all, and also Kendrick made a great point, right? And I appreciate that point because he was talking about, could technically the Mets offer Pete a qualifying offer? They technically could. They technically could. And the reason why I said no is because obviously, like, they're not going to do it. And Scott Boras and Pete Alonso, especially with the playoff performance that he had, would just laugh at it. Back when we were talking about Pete in the regular season and how much he struggled, right? If we were confident that he wasn't going to get any long-term deals, long-term contract offers, then we were kind of thinking about that. I was floating that idea out there, but especially with the run that he had to end that season in the playoffs, someone's going to offer him up 5 or 6 years. I mean, someone's going to do it. And to segue into that conversation that Rob just brought up, I mentioned it in my live stream a couple of days ago, and I made a brief. I was kind of in a rush because I was heading to the New York Rangers game. And that pissed me off because they got absolutely obliterated by the Capitals. But anyways, I had to rush out of that stream. And as I was discussing Christian Walker versus Pete Alonso in terms of the production in 2024 and the contract valuation per Spotrac's algorithm, if you want to know what Spotrac has in mind for these two players, 3 years, $66.2 million for Christian Walker, and 6 years for $174 million for Pete. That's $29 million versus $22 million between the two. And obviously you don't have the extra 3 years. I mean, even if it was Pete Alonso for around that value, with the Mets' flexibility in terms of the starting payroll being at 141, they could easily sign a combination of those three guys, whether it's Soto and Pete or Soto and Walker. They can do that very easily and still field the rest of their roster and address all the other needs. But again, maybe Walker might be a little bit more realistic, and especially when you talk about prioritizing some of that young talent down the road, you would save that opportunity by only signing a guy for 3 years instead of the 6, right? Because I don't think Pete Alonso is going to sign for anything less than 5 and maybe nothing less than 6. So again, we'll see. But it's kind of interesting to me that Spotrac still has Pete Alonso as being the highest paid first baseman, even with this type of season he just had. Obviously, Freddie Freeman makes $27 million a year. Goldschmidt made 26, I believe. I mean, I don't know. Who's going to make Pete Alonso the highest paid first baseman in the league? It's going to be interesting.
It must be inflation. It's not overall talent. But, again, there's always a desperate team. And that's the thing you got to worry about. And that's what David Stearns got to worry about. And look, Christian Walker is the perfect, seems like, player wrapped in a bow for David Stearns, right? High quality production, a short-term deal for obviously a good amount of money, a little over $20 million, but a little less. And then you don't have to worry about the years. Listen, I don't think the money is concerning when it comes to Pete Alonso. It's the years, or anybody for that matter, right? You don't mind giving a 10, 12-year deal to a guy like Juan Soto, who's only 26 years old, who just turned 26, right? 10 years of that deal, he'll just be 36 years old. Just put this into concept, into reality a little bit. Pete Alonso's what? Going to be 30 or is 30 right now? Starting the season, I think he might be 31 or something like that. Just thinking 4.5 to 5 years, he'll be 36. You wouldn't even be halfway to Soto's end of deal, and he'll just be turning 29, 30. So that's the difference of why you would give Soto a tremendous amount of years, because of the age. So I think Christian Walker is the perfect type of David Stearns free agent player, right? You can get the production almost similar offensively, if not better, than, I wouldn't say better power-wise, but it's close, to Pete Alonso, and you're saving 3 to 4 years and near $100 million. Like, that is a huge difference. If you can get close production from Pete Alonso offensively compared to Christian Walker and save all that money in years, that is a tremendous deal. And I'm not saying that it's going to work. Like, Pete Alonso can go elsewhere, say to the Cubs, and just tear it up the next 5 years. And Christian Walker can be a complete wash. But it's a better deal. And at the end of the day, Pete Alonso can have 3 better years than Christian Walker over the next 3 years. But Christian Walker's contract ends in 3 years. Pete Alonso still got 3 to 4 years left, if that's going to be the case. And they might not be good years. And that might lead to, listen, if David Stearns gets Pete Alonso, and it kind of takes him out of the Juan Soto positioning.
It won't.
It won't, but say if it does. Say if David Stearns, listen, I'd rather go after Teoscar Hernandez and work out pitcher, sign Corbin Burns or something like that. But if it does, I would be extremely disappointed, because if you can get Christian Walker and get similar production offensively, and then Juan Soto is definitely on the table, I have to do that. As much as, Pete Alonso is homegrown, you have to make the smarter decision. And Christian Walker at that moment will be a smarter decision if Pete Alonso takes you out of the Juan Soto sweepstakes. Not saying that I think it will, but if the Mets lose out on Juan Soto because they didn't want to go the extra year or extra $30 million or $50 million, but they re-signed Pete Alonso, and that's probably the reasoning, that would annoy the hell out of me so much, because all you're doing is running it back again. And it wasn't good enough, right? We had a really good year, but I want a championship, right? This team didn't do it, right? You can bring in Corbin Burns, but the core guys are still there. I think you still have to ruffle the apple cart a little bit, Chris. I think you got to make changes to the core just because it's not good enough. It hasn't been good enough.
I'm not in
Change my mind.
I'm not in any position to judge this core outside of McNeil at this point, because They proved like I can't after what we just saw this past season, especially down the stretch in the playoffs when this team needed Pete Alonso the most. And this is where I will come to the defense of Pete Alonso. I was ripping my hair out, in the regular season, watching him fail time after time after time with runners in scoring position. But the fact that he was able to sort of provide that production in the playoffs, I can't judge at that point. Like, I think that this core needs more to it because McNeil's not part of that core anymore. And so now your core is left with Brandon Nimmo, who he is the one that had a horrendous season and playoff run. So maybe he more so gets a little bit more of the blame in my eyes than Pete Alonso. But I think you just need to add to this core, right? They need help. And they still can reshuffle it, right? I mean, outside of Lindor and Nimmo, they can still reshuffle it. But I wouldn't say they need to, right? If Pete Alonso is back in the Mets uniform, I'm not going to complain. I won't.
No.
And I'm not in the business of also just like pinching pennies on these guys, any of these guys. I don't get caught up in, Pete Alonso. And I know I just said it, right? And I was kind of surprised that Spotrack's algorithm still has that. But if the Mets make Pete Alonso the highest paid first baseman, I don't care. I really don't care. It's more about the years, like you said, rather than the actual AAV. Because what's the difference of $2 million a year, right? Or $3 million a year when you're talking about 26 million versus 29? Or hell, even the $7 million between, right, Christian Walker and his $22 million a year contract valuation and Pete Alonso's 29. In the grand scheme of things, right, that is not a large portion of this payroll, right? And you don't take a dip, or you don't take the difference in production you get from these two guys isn't really that astronomically different. So again, right, if Mets fans want to sit here and analyze Steve Cohen's wallet in terms of saving a couple of $1 million AAV here and there, I think I don't know what we're doing here at that point, because again, the Mets, it's not going to take them out of the Soto sweepstakes, right?
Yeah.
It's not. They have so much money to work with. They have an excess of $130 million. Maybe if they're willing to go back up to 300, which I'm sure Steve Cohen's willing to do, they have about 140, 50, 60 million dollars to spend. I mean, if Juan Soto takes up 50 million of that, you're still in great shape.
Yeah.
So
well, I think
that's my positioning.
I think it's the years when it comes to, in particular, Pete Alonso. I don't think it's I think it's the years. I think the Mets would be willing to give around 180, 85 million. I don't think they're going to go to 200. Even though they might, but then you would have to add another year because you're going to give Pete Alonso 6 years, 200 million. What is that? $35 million. That's a little insane. But again, I think it's the years that I think Stearns worries about. That's why I'm like, do I think Pete Alonso is going to take us out of the Juan Soto sweepstakes? No. But, that better not be a reason, because then that's a stupid reason, because you're definitely playing it back. You really are. And I know, you're still skeptical about you're still on that line with the core, but how many more years are we going to do this, right? Brandon Nimmo is constantly hurt, right? Pete Alonso had his worst season of his career in a contract year. Not saying that he can't be great. He might get his contract and, the pressure might be off, but the pressure might be extremely harder because now he's getting paid like one of the best first basemen in baseball, even though he's not. And that pressure might persist, right? The core is slowly falling away. And again, you can always add, and that might be the difference, right? That clearly might be the difference. But how much more will they add? I think they will add a lot, right? I think if they do sign Pete Alonso, they're not going to stop there, right? It would be stupid. It would be malpractice, right? David Stearns shouldn't have the job if he stops there, right? I think that's fair to say, but I don't think he will. I do wonder, because they have a tremendous amount of payroll flexibility. And I do think, will they just go crazy? Will David Stearns say, you know what, I'm going to be smart in other areas like the bullpen and just go crazy in free agency? But we have our opinions, right? We don't know what David Stearns is going to do with all this money, right? We might think he might spend every penny of that plus $1 million flexibility he has with payroll. Maybe Cohen will give him that leeway, but we saw Cohen take a step back and let David Stern work. So if David Stern believes that he only needs to spend $60 million of that $110 million flexibility, then are we going to be complaining about it because we didn't like that offseason? Or are we going to trust David Stern? Because I will trust him regardless of what he does. I might not agree with all the moves he makes and the money he spends. But what if he, because we don't know how David Stearns is going to work this flexibility payroll, right? He's talked the talk already, and he's done a great job, with financial lack of financial flexibility he had last offseason. I do wonder, Chris, do you think that he is going to allocate a lot of that money? Because obviously these are our opinions. We don't know because we haven't seen it yet. But do you think he's going to allocate a lot of it? Not all of it, but say if it is most of it to help this roster get better.
Fire Blazing Media, Rooker has now had 2 pretty decent, in my estimation, seasons back to back. So I think it's a little bit of a stretch to say it's only one. Just my personal opinion, though. It depends on what type of contracts they're willing to give out, right? If they go, and give out 2 long-term deals to, let's say, Pete Alonso and Juan Soto, right? That's already, as I just mentioned in the chat, $68 to $70 million roughly in terms of the valuation there. And that's given Juan Soto making $50 million a year, which we're still not really sure about. We saw that Ken Rosenthal said that it might start there, right? We simply don't know. Right now, per Spotrac, I think he's around $40 million a year in what he's projected to make. We'll see what happens. But that goes back to the conversation of whether you're giving out all long-term contracts or maybe, a lot of one-year deals as well. Because if you're giving out 2 or 3 long-term deals, that takes up a good chunk of change. And then you give out a bunch of one-year deals again because you want to allocate, right, those resources in future years to the youth and still give that a real chance. Then, yeah, they're probably going to spend more so like every penny than, if they were giving away a bunch of, long-term deals, because at that point they're handcuffing themselves in future years. So it's all about the types of contracts, long-term versus short-term, they're going to give out. And I think that there's a happy medium of, long-term versus short-term deals. And I do think that, right, with what we've seen in the past, maybe it won't get back up to 305 million. Maybe it'll be just under. But again, you're still talking about $140 million worth of wiggle room, just about, even if they don't hit that $300 million cap hit. Also, I guess, in the last couple of minutes here, I know there's so many like what if scenarios we could kind of play in our heads, and what Juan Soto is going to make is definitely one of those topics. I put that poll up on my community tab on my channel. If you guys didn't check it out, I gave you all 4 options in terms of Juan Soto's total contract value, regardless of the amount of years that he gets, whether it's 12, 13, 14, doesn't matter. So make sure you're going ahead and answering those polls. But what about also the other scenario here, in terms of the first base options that you have in moving Mark Vientos over to first base and going the external route? I know that a lot of people probably wouldn't want to see Alex Bregman signed to a long-term deal worth crazy money. I think that he's been on a little bit of a decline in terms of his overall play. But again, right, he's able to put 25 plus home runs over the fence for you consistently. It is an option at the end of the day. Or I know a lot of Mets fans would not like this, but I'm kind of in the opposing category of this topic, and I'm curious to get your thoughts. And what's happening in St. Louis, Nolan Arenado might be available too. He's got 3 years left of his deal. I know he's, 33 years old, just about, maybe 34. I mean, if you need a third baseman, I know that he's been kind of declining in terms of what he was producing earlier on in his career, but he's still providing some pretty serviceable numbers. So honestly, I wouldn't even complain about if the Mets try to go that route in terms of third base. I know I'm in the minority in terms of like that line of thinking, because I've seen a lot of Mets fans just absolutely shoot that idea down. But I would honestly not complain at all if that ended up happening, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted Arenado right before the Cardinals got him. I was pissed off that we didn't go get him, but now I don't know. You know, he is in a decline. He's still great defensively, but that would be a tough call for me. If you bring Vientos over to first and bring Arenado there, does that make us better? Like, maybe, but man, I don't know, man. But I mean, I guess I wouldn't be mad about it. I would be curious, right? I would be a little curious because I love Arenado as a player, but it would be interesting, though. Very interesting. I want to ask you something. Where do you think David Stearns is going to go heavy uh, money wise? Do you think it's going to be the position players because he's had a career resume of not paying pitchers long term deals, and just because he has the money, I don't think his philosophy is changing. Will he knows Corbin Burns very well, obviously. Will he be willing to give Corbin Burns the big contract for a pitcher? Because I don't know if he's going to allocate a lot of money. Maybe he'll do it with Burns, and everybody else might be a 1-2 year deal when it comes to starting pitching. Do you think he's going to focus more on the position players money wise? Because I think that's the smarter route. Or will you think he's going to go heavy pitching in the starting pitching department when it comes to money, like the Buellers of the world, Fried, Burns, other than the position? Where do you go?
I think, I mean, Juan Soto's on the table, so that's going to be a big chunk of change right there. I think it's going to be the position players, and I'm very skeptical in terms of him dishing out long-term deals north of 4 or 5 years for any starting pitcher on this market. I mean, even if it's Corbin Burns, I really do think that with David Stearns' track record, he hasn't really paid that many pitchers in terms of giving out those long-term deals, at least from what I've seen and what I know about David Stearns. So if Corbin Burns wants a 7 or 8 year deal, I mean, there's also, like Explosive is saying, a lot of chatter about him being a California guy and him wanting to go to the Dodgers, which, as unfortunate as that is a very real possibility. So therefore, that's why I've kind of already shifted my thinking and knowing that, I know Max Fried is also a California guy, if I'm not mistaken, but I think Max Fried, for a less amount of years, will get the job done. Walker Buehler, I know that he's had his injury concerns, but he looked absolutely phenomenal in the playoffs as well for the Dodgers. I think that, they might not be able to go after him if they're going to go after another starting pitcher. So I think that you can get him, as Mike is saying, for a little bit cheaper. I don't know if it's going to be $100 million deal. I disagree with that. I still think he has a lot left to prove, and teams know that. But I think you can get him without having to dish out those massive amounts of years that you would have to do for a Corbin Burns. And I think Fried, the same thing. I think you can maybe get away with a four-year deal with Max Fried, 5-year deal, something like that. Anywhere north of that, I think you're starting to get into an unrealistic territory with David Stearns. So by knowing that and by believing in that, I think that the position players, right? Bullpen is definitely not in the question. You don't pay relievers big time money. We know that to be the case through and through, outside of like a Clase or a Diaz or a Hader. But I think that it's definitely has to be the position players. I mean, through and through, when you take a look at the holes that this team has, particularly in the outfield, obviously, right? When you talk about first base, I think strictly money-wise, it's going to be the position players.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a safer route, to be quite honest with you, right? Well, all these injuries the pitchers are getting and the way they break down rather quickly and the way teams use their bullpen now and innings isn't a big thing, right? 200 innings from a starter used to be the status quo, used to be the norm. Now, if it's 170, it's a lot, right? So because teams use their bullpen so much more, I don't think long-term deals for even top line starters is a dangerous game to play because they're one pitch away from blowing out their arm, right? And they seem to get injured rather easily. And at least with the position players, there's more of a proven record of guys staying healthy and being productive for the most part, I think it's a safer route where I would allocate a lot more money to the position players than the starting rotation and the bullpen. Now, again, just like I said, David Stearns is a guy that knows Corbin Burnes very well. He didn't have the financial flexibility in Milwaukee to extend Burnes earlier in his career, right? So if he believes Burnes can hold up, I think he'd be willing to because he knows that player, right? He made that Tyrone Taylor-Houser deal because he knows those players, right? So I think Corbin Burnes is a very interesting option. And I know Explosive brought up the tweet that Burnes put an eye emoji when the Dodgers won the title and, with the pitcher and all that. Yeah, that's fine. We know he's a California guy. That's fine. That doesn't mean he's going there, right? Burnes is a Boris guy. He's going to the highest bidder. That's just a fact. So we'll see how it goes.
Dodgers could also be the highest bidder too. I mean, it's realistic.
I don't think because he's a California guy means he's just going to go there and take a lesser deal, right? I don't think that. I mean, it's possible, but it's rare with these unions. With the union now, they don't mess around with taking lesser of a deal, right? They were very unhappy with Aaron Judge going back to the Yankees for less money. They weren't excited about that. So the union has a lot to say about that stuff as well. And Boris is a union guy. So it's going to be very interesting, but both of our opinions, allocation, money-wise, payroll-wise, needs to go more to position player-wise. So Alonso, Minaya, and Severino, we'll keep that for another day because those are our guys. That's something that you can always bring down the road because conversations are going to start probably at the GM meetings next week, and we'll really get into that. So we'll just leave that topic to the side. So, guys, are you ready for this offseason? I know I am. I know Chris is. We're ready, guys, right? This is only day one of Mets Hot Stove, and God knows how many days it will be, but obviously it's going to be a lot of shows when things really starting to heat up. I believe our next show will probably be Sunday, maybe Sunday, Monday. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, that works for me.
All right, so we're going to put it up. Obviously, we're going to put the show up earlier than the day so we can actually get people to hit that like button and know that it's going to happen and put it all throughout social media. So remember, guys, follow NYM Hot Stove. That's where you're going to get all the information in regards to when the streams are happening. We're going to go live on our channels. Obviously, those are our X accounts as well. So follow all of them as well. Guys, day one, Mets Hot Stove in the books. It was a broad array of topics, but it's only opinions at this point until we start hearing rumors and the reporters start doing their job, hopefully. So, guys, final thoughts for Chris, and then we'll call it a night, and we'll see you on the weekend for Mets Hot Stove.
Yeah, again, I'm really excited to be doing these shows consistently. Again, we'll be here with you all 2 to 3 times a week, maybe even more if news really, gets kicked into gear. Appreciate everybody that's on both channels and both live chats, showing love, showing the support to us. Again, this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we got planned for this show. So I appreciate everybody. Make sure you're smashing those thumbs up buttons, making your opinion and your voice heard through our polls. Let us know what you're thinking. Like, we welcome everybody's opinions. Like, we won't necessarily agree to it all the time, but we want to hear what the general Mets public has to say. So continue to hit the live chat comments, continue to comment under our videos and under our polls and let us know what you're thinking. And also, as a disclaimer, I know I said this a multitude of times last year, and the whole Shohei Ohtani debacle, that happened with, JP Morosi, et cetera. I mean, just be careful with where you get your news from, right? These guys do their job and they're trying to be the first ones on the scoop. And people can slip up, right? I mean, Heyman, we saw what happened with Aaron Judge. I mean, just be careful with where you get your news, and be careful to really do your research in terms of, who these guys that you rely on your news for work for and who they are buddies with, in terms of spoon feeding some information for a certain agent or agents out there, not to name any names, but the former, or I guess you say Mets first baseman, he hired him as his agent. You know who I'm talking about. Just again, we'll get you. We got you with the news. They got you with the news, right? Jeff Passan, there's a multitude of guys that are very reputable and they're very good at what they do. But a lot of people last year in this fan base, went into a frenzy with a bunch of different false reports. So on the first day of this Hot Stove Live podcast, I wanted to state that as my closing thoughts, because I think that a lot of fans get caught up into the hype in terms of believing everything in the rumor mill that they hear, and it's just simply sometimes not the case. So I appreciate it. Again, we obviously clearly missed Mets baseball by talking about, this show and Mets baseball, the offseason, for an hour and a half on the stream, but I can't wait to be back with you all. I definitely appreciate it.
Absolutely, guys. So again, follow us on X, follow the show on X, and make sure you subscribe to the channel, guys, and make sure you hit that like button. That's crucial to continuing the success of the channels and these shows, right? We can't do the shows without you guys. So we do appreciate all the support, guys. So guys, day one, Mets Hot Stove in the books, guys. Thank you for watching Mets Hot Stove, day one of the off season. Enjoy the rest of your night, guys. Let's go Mets, and we'll see you next time, probably on Sunday night for Mets Hot Stove day two. Enjoy your night. Let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.
In the dead of night, full of echo. Concrete jungle, trees bust to grow. Mets in the air, chase glory, no fear. Broken back.